searching for answers.
Here are today's top stories.
Been over 24 hours.
And the local news.
What we see are a lot of things that are going on the earth.
This is Art of Heaven News Talk.
Yes, it is Art of Heaven News Talk time. Broadcasting live from WHPC studios in Garden City, New York. This is Art of Heaven News Talk, where we deliver global, national, and local news through the lens of faith, comparing these stories to Scripture. I'm your host, Johnny Brumit, and joining me today are my co-hosts, Pastor Jerry O'Sullivan, theologian Nathan Gassaway, and media personality Arnold Coco. If you want to join the conversation, lines are open at 516-572-7440. It's 516-572-7440. So it's Memorial Day weekend.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So anybody got some plans?
I know I'll be cooking after this, meeting the neighbors, and then for the rest of the weekend, I'm probably going to go check out the sailboat and do some sailing.
I think I may have a barbecue with some of the college-age students this weekend, so I'm looking forward to that.
I have a graduation party.
Nice. Well, at least nobody's getting on an airplane today. I hear it's a little crazy out there. I think this is a record-breaking Friday before Memorial Day. It says 43.8 million people are expected to roam at least 50 miles from their home between Thursday and Monday.
Yeah, it definitely will not be me. I'll be staying near the home.
Now, 38 of those 43 million are taking vehicles. And I was reading a report that said it's pretty dangerous to be on the road this week. A lot of, accidents happen, deadly accidents happen around this weekend. So be safe out there driving.
Yeah, I was thinking this today. I encountered a bunch of crazy drivers, so maybe they're just warming up for it. But it is important that people be a little more cautious, a lot more congestion, traffic out there. Police officers are out in the droves, which is a good thing, I think. So, yeah, be safe.
Yeah, even on my way here today to the studio, there was an accident and airbags deployed. And I think part of it is just with so many more people on the road, there's more of an incidence for hitting people and banging into each other. So,
yeah, and there's a lot of stress too, right? Like, look, people have busy schedules. They're trying to get things done, so it doesn't help.
Yeah. Now, we're pointing out all these scary, statistics and facts about Memorial Day. Here's another one for you, since we're going there. There has been 5 shark bites around New York in the past week, I believe. So what they're doing is they're putting drones out to keep an eye on these sharks. But, I don't know how to feel, because this morning I woke up and my daughter says, I'm going to the beach. And I'm like, all right, have fun.
Yeah.
Watch out for the sharks.
You won't ever catch me in the ocean anyway. I'm not worried about shark attacks in the ocean. I'm more concerned about them on land, where sometimes you encounter people that behave like sharks. But, yeah.
And I think the reality is, too, like it used to be, well, if you're in Florida, and the waters have gotten so much hotter around Florida that I think a lot of the animals are coming up north to the cooler water. And as a result, our waters are becoming a little bit more like Florida.
Is that what you think it is?
I think like lobster, for example, used to be prevalent and everywhere in the bays, but now you have to go further north to catch lobster, and it's part of just everything's shifting.
Yeah, some people, and some species rather, I should say, they like warmer waters, some like colder waters, but what's undeniable is there are shifts in the ecosystem, and those are a consequence, I think, of the oceans getting a bit warmer.
Well, we don't really got too much to complain about, because you know what? We're actually not going through what people in Iowa are going through. You hear about all those tornadoes? There's 200 tornadoes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I heard there was something like 267 of them in the span of just over 2 weeks in the Midwest, some of them in the South. Now, I grew up in the Midwest, so I was used to seeing these things. In fact, in elementary school, we would do tornado drills periodically. We'd have to go into the hallway and assume a certain position. But it looks like these storms are kind of ravaging the Midwest and some parts of the South. But in any case, there's an uptick of them this season. So when they're predicting even more.
Yeah, Iowa, they've been hit.
I had a friend that I guess about 2 weeks ago that was in Houston when the tornado or whatever storm came through, and everyone was surprised, and they weren't warned all that well, and as a result, just a lot of damage, a lot of confusion, people stuck in their cars, and My friend was had a meeting, and they had to go out in the hallway and huddle in the hallway and just stuck. He was traveling there, couldn't get out, no electricity. So again, the weather is very severe, and it's uncertain in places that usually it's fairly not as severe.
Man, so we got tornadoes, but also hurricane warnings. So they actually have pointed out that there are 8 to 13 expected hurricanes coming. Now, I'm just going to throw the question out there real quick on behalf of people that may not necessarily believe in the biblical history or do. Do you think that like this is headed towards like the end times? We're talking about tornadoes, shark attacks.
Well, I think we tend to read too much into that. I mean, we look at tornadoes and things and we say there's an uptick. Sure, there are, but we've only been keeping data on this for about a century. And the truth is technology makes it possible for us to see more natural disasters, but certainly there's an increase when you see weather patterns changing, things warming up. So that creates a problem. But this also underscores the fact that we need to have, with all these crazy events taking place, emergency systems that work well. And recently in Nassau County, we were down about an hour. So, that could really interrupt that. That is the 911 service. So, some people have recommended you keep, direct lines to your local precincts on your phone.
Yes. That was big news this week. The 911 system crashed, I guess, right? And this is for Nassau County, which is home to 1.4 million people, roughly.
Yeah, and it's not the first time, right? There's been another outage where 4 states were impacted, and I think there was like a third-party installer that put in a light post or light pole that caused a major outage. But I think we're kind of spoiled with the whole 911. It's right, kind of a redirect service, right? We could put our direct numbers in there as a backup, but then also if you look on a global perspective, there's not every country that has this service. And also, if you do travel this weekend, you go to other countries, make sure you check what the emergency numbers are, because they're not the same for every country.
And Pastor Jerry was sharing with me earlier today something that surely we don't forget the number for 911, but in case you do, there's a psalm in the Bible, Psalm 91, Jerry. What were you telling me about that?
Well, when you look at Psalm 91, it's just this psalm that people are crying out to God, and God is listening, and He responds. And I couldn't find proof that 911 comes from Psalm 91, but the Psalm 91 verse 1 says, "Whoever dwells in the shelter of the Most High will rest in the shadow of the Almighty." And then it just goes on and on, all about how God can be a refuge and a protection for people in times of trouble. So it's just a great, read Psalm 91.
Wow. It's a great memory device, if nothing else, because, as we believe as Christians, God does protect those, and if you call upon Him, He's an ever-present help in the time of trouble.
And I think for most of us, especially in America, where things, for the most part, are pretty comfortable and safe most of the time, that when stuff happens, it does make us pray and cry out to God.
Now, just for the news side of things, you can always call your local precinct if stuff happens.
Well, that's right, and they were redirecting people to their local precincts. But now, many of us the great thing about having a phone, unless the phone system goes down or internet goes down, you can look all those things up. But as Arnold was saying, it might not be a bad idea to keep a couple of those emergency numbers already stored on your phone.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and when I travel abroad in various countries, most people have learned to take care of themselves, because when they call 911, and some other countries have the police, and of course nobody comes. So there's private security. You bring your loved one to the doctor yourself, and this is part of being in a country where we have access and resources. It's wonderful, but when it doesn't work, we should be prepared.
Yeah, and we're used to the infrastructure that we have here. But, with all of the things that have been going on that show us that we can't completely depend on our technology and infrastructure, and especially during a time, this weekend where we're honoring veterans who gave their life for this country in Memorial Day, and there are all these potential accidents that could take place, it'd be good to have some of those things stored, I think.
Yeah, and technology-wise, I'd say we're making things more complex, right? We used to have dedicated circuit switching networks, and now we're like IP based, and things can get hacked, and so the more complex you make things, the more opportunities you have for failure. So
when it's a crash these days. Well, you're listening to Art of Heaven News Talk on 90.3 WHPC. Now, what is someone going to do if they feel suicidal, let's say? It doesn't always work calling 911, and that's not what people do realistically. And I'm looking at a story that came out this week on the Washington Times about a homeless man who, it's a pretty interesting story. Now, this homeless guy ended up in a church service, and he was causing a commotion, it looks like, and he was using profanity and such. Now, this could have been handled with a ton of different ways, but the way that this pastor handled this was amazing, right? He gently rebuked the cursing, but with a compassionate twist.
Well, yeah, what I thought was interesting is this. So it turns out one of the parishioners at this church had reached out to this homeless person and invited the person to church. And that homeless person happened to have been suicidal at that time. Well, we find out a little bit more about this later in the story, but he stood up during one of the services, and, he was kind of letting it rip with some profanity. But what was interesting about the pastor is he didn't rebuke him in the sense of giving him a hard time. He saw him, and he allowed him to speak, to share his story. Now, what was interesting is this kind of reminds me of a story in the Bible where you have a blind man crying out for Jesus to help, and everybody's trying to quiet him down. He's saying, "Son of David, have mercy on me." But what's interesting is that Jesus saw him, and he heard him. And then it says that Jesus was moved with compassion, with mercy. And this Greek word is like he was moved in his gut. It's like a gut feeling, like he was in the bowel. We talk about the bowels of mercy. And the question is, for many of us as Christians, is do we see people, as image bearers of God, when they cry out? Do we respond with mercy and compassion? And I think this is a good object lesson. I mean, it's a real life story, but it's a good object lesson for people in the church, because sometimes we become a little bit too numb and we can turn our blind eye to people, and we just really don't allow compassion.
Yeah, the pastor in this situation, he was Christ-like, right?
Well, I've made the mistake of hey, I have an agenda, I have a study or a sermon to get through, and I don't have time to deal with problems, and I've always regretted those times where I pushed through. And I've learned over the years that when someone is in trouble, emotionally, spiritually, relationally, and they voice something, you've got to stop and you've got to encourage them, listen to them, minister to them, or it's like, what are you doing as the church? So I'm just glad this pastor made the right decision to, I have an agenda for this Sunday morning, but I'm going to throw it out the window to love this man.
Yeah, and how do we discern that? Because this seems a little bit tricky. If you had a person disrupting a service all the time, that could be complicated. So how is it, you think, Jerry, that, or anyone else, if you have a thought on this, that as pastors or just say community leaders, where we can strike a balance with seeing people as image bearers of God, showing compassion, and at the same time be able to, maybe for a pastor to get to a Sunday morning service? How do you strike that balance?
Yeah, and if this homeless man came back every week and the same scenario happened every week, it's not going to work. The church will be disrupted. So, what I would typically do is when I know someone's dealing with mental illness or emotional instability, it's encouraging them to meet with me one-on-one or in a smaller group, because the church needs to keep doing what the church does. And on Sunday morning, that's encouraging everyone. So yes, we want to leave the 99 and pursue the one, but at the same time, we can't do that every week. We have to also love and serve the 99. So it's trying to create an alternative way to love, support. Because what I don't want is sometimes I'll have, in a sense, someone looking to come to a church gathering, and they're looking towards like a group therapy. And no, it's church. It's not group therapy. So we have to keep figuring out a way to love that one person, but also keep encouraging everyone.
Yeah, and the point of discernment is a very good one, I think, right? It's like very interesting to see. I looked up the full-length video, but it still starts at the point where church leaders think we got it all right. Church leaders think we got it. And then the guy calls out BS, right? And that's where, at least where the video starts. But then he already addresses him with Anthony, so you can tell there was some prelude to that where he was calling out this profanity. But for whatever reason, this pastor, I think, discerned that the story was being told for him. And that was really a key thing for me, because, you're talking about going after the one, leaving the 99. That's really exactly the story that happened right here, right? And God wrote this story. I believe God wrote this story that in a real practical, through actions, right? And then it's interesting because Michael, that actually invited Anthony to this service, or I actually not sure that it was an invite or that he requested, and then he even said, can you bring me right? You want to go to the church right now? Yeah, I want to go right now. But Michael was at the 8 a.m. service. He heard the sermon. Talking about going after the one for the 99, and so that same pastor already preached that sermon. Michael heard it. He went out, immediately applied the sermon. I mean, like, I try to run a community group once a week and try to get the sermon applied, but this was like instant. And then the fruits of that come straight back to the church and say, okay, this is pretty awesome. Like, he was let's about to commit suicide.
Yeah. Let's play this story back. Let's dive a little bit deeper into this story.
Yeah.
So a guy named Michael sat through the first service of the church that was about,
8
God going after the one and leaving the 99 sheep, right?
Yeah.
And the parable of Jesus, right?
Correct.
On his way home from church, he sees a group of homeless men, stops, buys
He
them
actually
food.
saw a woman. It was a woman that had a sign that said, I'm hungry, please help. And so he decides to buy food for this woman. He comes back. The woman, he can't find the woman. Like, she moved places or whatever, and then runs into Anthony.
This gentleman. And somehow this guy said, take me to your church. And he said, it dawned on him for a minute. He's like, I just came from sitting through a whole service at church. But he took him back. Yeah. And this guy, probably out of nowhere, just kind of caused a little bit of a disruption. But the way the pastor handled this, I really respect, because in recent news, there was a guy that charged the pulpit with a gun, if you heard that story. So he didn't get thrown off. He said, this is what we're about. And he actually turned aside and let the man rant on. And then that's when the man came out and said, I was suicidal. I was going to kill myself today.
Yeah.
It was interesting that the pastor embraces him. I recently been listening to the song. In fact, I was listening on my way over here. It was the last song I heard before I came into the studio. It's a song called "Jesus Saves" by Riley Green, and it tells the story of a homeless person and him holding up a sign that says "Jesus Saves." You should check it out. A friend recently turned me onto it. But I had lunch at Chick-fil-A today, and oftentimes when I'm at Chick-fil-A, I'll see a gentleman outside holding up a sign, and I don't always give. But oftentimes, God will move my heart. And I guess one of the things I'm wondering and maybe other people are wondering this too, how do we know when we need to pause when we encounter someone? Because part of it is seeing people. Because we become very blind. People become kind of like, background, like obscure, not really there kind of things. But these people bear the image of God. How do we know when we should pause, and how do we know what we should do? What do you think, Jerry? Or
interesting conversation.
Well, it's just, I love that they were going through that scripture where Jesus says, "Leave the 99 for the one," and one of the verses I hold on to is from James. It says, "Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says." And they did what the Bible says, to love and serve and listen to and see somebody in distress. And as a result, my hope is that man's life was changed.
But to Nathan's point, though, that's a interesting question, because I'm kind of a controlling guy. And sometimes I see somebody, I'm like, I'm not giving them money. They're going to go spend it on this or that. Oh, I'm going to buy them food. But I had this revelation a couple years back. To answer your question, Nathan, how I feel. Sometimes if God says, give them the money, that's between them and God what they do with it. Give them the money, and I'll just give them the money. Bless them.
Yeah, and I think it's great that you don't want to only be a hearer of the word, you want to be a doer, but being able to discern God's voice speaking to your heart, so to speak, I think that's part of it.
Yeah.
It's strange to leave Chick-fil-A God's Chicken, and come out of the parking lot and you see someone homeless and you don't do anything. I have a pastor friend who made up his mind that if he's in multiple lanes, if he's in the far left lane and someone asks for money, meaning closest to his car window, he will always give it. That's the kind of thing. Now, if he happens to be in the middle lane, he doesn't do it. It may seem like a strange thing, but he says oftentimes, almost always, when he encounters someone who is in dire strait or homeless, they happen to be closest to the left lane. And
And I tend to, I like to give. I like to be considered a generous person, but I like to be strategic in my giving. And a lot of times I like to partner with organizations that I know are loving and serving people, desperate people, in a tangible, helpful way. Like the example is maybe World Vision and others. And so that I tend not to give to random people. So, that's something I've unless I know them to some extent. But this is where it's just, but I do give a lot to organizations that are helping people in need that have been vetted, I guess, because I'm just one of those people that I guess I know that people do manipulate people's emotions, and I'm one of the people that oftentimes people try to manipulate to get resources. So it's just one of those things.
Well, there's a lot of wisdom in that because, the Bible says everyone should give as they purposed in their heart. So they've made up their mind what to give. I think there's a lot of wisdom. And plus places like World Vision and other groups, IJM, International Justice Mission, the money you contribute is multiplied, the effect of it, because they're very organized and things like that. So I think Jerry's is speaking a lot of wisdom there. The tricky part is knowing, are there patterns sometimes that God will interrupt? And once in a while, it may not be the list that I already have. Once in a while, it's good to be caught off guard by God and know when to give. So.
Yeah, and just sensing the prompting from the Spirit, I think. And what I really like about this story also is that it goes into, the prodigal son, and the sermon goes into that. And then, in this case, he's hugging the pastor is hugging Anthony, right? And it's like he's even asking him, when was the last time you're hugged? And he couldn't figure it out. That's was right. A long
That's
time.
How the article ended, yeah.
And so that hug is powerful, but if you watch that full video, you'll see like there was a lot of tears involved, because I think the pastor realized that, hey, this is a story being told by God, and it's being told through actions. And so, they say, preach the gospel, and if necessary, use words, right? It's like it comes down to the action.
Interesting. Now, I have compassion on people, of course, but sometimes after we bless somebody or help somebody, we kind of got to give them the resources. And I'm a little less compassionate after reading an article and actually seeing this viral TikTok video, if you will, onto our next story here at Art of Heaven News Talk, where a guy travels across 4 states to come work in New York City and says his salary is worth it. Now, this is a pretty interesting story. Now, this guy comes from Delaware. First thing he does is he takes a 8-minute drive or so to the train. Mm-hmm. All right. Gets on the train, spends an hour and 37 minutes on the train. He says he brings an inflatable neck pillow and blackout shades, catch some extra Z's, and then he gets off that train, walks about a block to his office in New York City, probably goes up some elevators, we know how we do in New York, and spends his workday in New York City. And then he does the same thing home, and he gets home about 7:30 p.m. Now, this man has some work ethic.
Well, yeah, this guy Kyle Rice, he's a suburban father of 2, and I mean, this is quite a commute. I mean, from Delaware to Manhattan, but he says that the pay increase is worth it for him, and he thinks so for his family. Hey, and I can't fault him on that. Sometimes, I mean, there's a huge difference in the pay scale in, say, in Manhattan versus maybe Delaware. So I can't fault him from wanting to work hard. The tricky part is finding that work-life balance, I think. That's going to be a challenge. Traveling, I don't know, spending $1,500 a month on a commute sounds crazy if you're traveling 240 miles plus $1,500 a month. But if you do the math right and it is to your financial benefit, it may be worthwhile. The question will be is how is his family faring overall? How does he balance that? Jerry, you do a lot with finances and work-life balance. Would you do something like this? And what are the pros and cons, or maybe, how would you find the balance here?
Well, we know that the pay scale in New York City is a lot higher than most other places. And the reason they usually pay a lot more is because the cost of living is a lot higher. And, that most people, you're not supposed to spend more than 25% of your overall income towards your housing. And unfortunately, if you have an apartment in New York City, it's thousands of dollars for a one-room apartment. So this guy is saying, hey, I have 2 kids and I want to have a family life and a house, and there's no way I can do that in New York City unless you make over $200,000-$300,000 a year. So, he's created an alternative possibility, which I give him a lot of credit. But yeah, I mean, everything on a perfect day will work well. But what happens when a train is delayed, or when there's a storm and he's stuck hours away?
Yeah, that's crazy. But the craziest part about the story is that he says he gets to work earlier and more often shows up on time than average people in New York City.
And to put it into perspective, if you live more on eastern Long Island and you commute into the city, you're within the same state, but you're spending 2+ hours in your commute.
Well, I'll leave you with some wisdom from Warren Buffett. He says, I can buy anything I want, but the one thing I can't buy is time.
That's true.
So, think about that.
You know what? That's an amazing point. They say the currency of love is time. Thank you for listening. This has been Art of Heaven News Talk. Been here with Jerry O'Sullivan, Arnold Kokope, and Nathan Gasaway. Join us here every Friday, 3:30 to 4, 90.3 WHPC. Thank you, fellas.